Here is the full documentary-style script, rewritten in English from the perspective of a paddock. Across the paddock, the roar of the Ducatis and Aprilias dominating the front row seemed to mock the Yamaha team's struggle to find a technical direction. Mechanics worked in a vacuum of silence, with only the occasional clank of a wrench breaking the tension. Toprak wasn't just fighting the clock, he was fighting a wave of doubt spreading through the MotoGP paddock. Insiders began to whisper, questioning if the decision to move him from WorldSBK was a costly strategic blunder. This pressure was no longer about raw speed, it was about the ego of a rider considered a once-in-a-generation talent. Jerez, with its narrow, technical corners, demands a perfect synchronization between man and machine, something that appeared to be a mystery for the package the Turkish rider was piloting. However, behind his sharp gaze, an unquenched ambition remained. Toprak knew that to claw his way out of 19th, he had to do something his rivals hadn't seen, a risk that might push him beyond the limits of common sense. The psychological weight reached its peak as the starter lights prepared to glow. Everyone in the garage knew there were only two outcomes for Toprak, a legendary comeback or a humiliating incident. Unfortunately, the Jerez asphalt has a way of providing the most painful answers to those who dare to challenge fate too aggressively. Yet just moments before the disaster unfolded, Toprak showed a brief flash of magic that ironically became the catalyst for a much larger catastrophe. Some called it luck, but for those who understand the physics of racing, Toprak's miraculous save at turn 13 was merely a warning that he was dancing on the edge of a very deep abyss. A rain-soaked FP2 session at Jerez is usually when riders choose to play it safe, but Toprak Razgatlioglu is not most riders. As his Yamaha M1 screamed toward turn 13, a high-speed sweeper demanding absolute balance, his front tire suddenly lost grip. In a matter of milliseconds, the bike leaned to a degree that should have been physically impossible to recover. But then, the world witnessed a moment of pure wizardry. Using his knee and elbow as a hydraulic brace, Toprak forced the bike upright, mimicking the legendary saves associated with Marc Marquez. The entire paddock gasped. The footage played on a loop on every team monitor, creating a sense of premature euphoria within the Prima Pramac garage. The technical crew began to believe they had found the limits of the M1, and Toprak's confidence skyrocketed. This was the moment where false hope began to poison strategic logic. Successfully saving the bike from a certain crash gave the illusion that Toprak could do anything with this machine, despite the fact that the 2026 Yamaha M1 still suffered from serious aerodynamic stability issues when caught in the slipstream of other bikes. Paddock whispers claimed El Turco had finally adapted. However, veteran observers in the pit lane felt an omen of dread. They saw that the action wasn't a sign of total control, but proof that the bike was too wild and unstable. Toprak was being forced to perform miracles just to stay on the asphalt. This psychological tension created a dangerous illusion of strength heading into the sprint race. Behind the rider's faint smile as he returned to the pits lay a burning but unrealistic conviction that he could execute any maneuver anywhere without consequence. It was a belief that was about to be tested by the cold, uncompromising laws of physics in the heat of actual battle. But the illusion of absolute control shattered into pieces just a few laps after the green flag dropped. In the elite world of Grand Prix racing, a single meter can be the difference between a hero's victory and a ruined reputation. And at Jerez's turn 5, Toprak chose to take a meter that didn't belong to him. The sprint race at the Spanish Grand Prix is always a theater of war, and for Toprak, it was the stage to prove that 19th on the grid was an anomaly. From the start, he rode with an aggression rarely seen in the premier class. He sliced through the field, using his trademark deep braking to overtake rivals with surgical precision. But MotoGP is a different ecosystem, where every rider defends with a higher level of ferocity. Entering lap 8, Toprak was tucked behind Lorenzo Savadori, the veteran wildcard for Aprilia. At turn 5, known as the Curvacito Pons, Toprak saw a sliver of an opening. With the intuition of a predator, he released the brakes early and lunged for the inside. But the calculation was off. His Yamaha M1 couldn't tighten the arc as quickly as he imagined. Losing front-end grip at high speed, Toprak's bike washed out, sliding uncontrollably and T-boning Savadori's Aprilia. The impact was violent and unavoidable. Both riders were launched into the gravel trap at high speed, leaving a cloud of dust and carbon fiber debris scattered across the track. A sudden hollow silence fell over the Prima Pramac garage. Team manager Gino Borsa could only hold his head in trembling hands as the replay flashed on the screen. This wasn't just a racing incident, it was the result of ambition overreaching technical capability. In the paddock, reactions were swift and harsh. The Aprilia mechanics were visibly incensed, while strategists began to question why a rookie would take such a monumental risk for a mid-pack position in a short race. The maneuver was labeled overambitious by the paddock elite, creating a stain on Toprak's reputation as a clean racer. Amidst the dust of Jerez, all that remained was profound disappointment and the realization that his FP2 heroics meant nothing when everything ended in a pile of rocks. However, the real drama was only beginning, as race direction began reviewing the footage with grim expressions. As the dust at Turn 5 began to settle, a larger storm was brewing inside the closed doors of the FIM MotoGP Stewards, where the fate of Toprak's weekend was being decided. Following the incident, the paddock atmosphere turned sharply political. Lorenzo Savadori, visibly shaken and in pain, was rushed to the medical center for evaluation, while Toprak returned to his garage with a bowed head. Moments later, the dreaded ticker appeared on the official monitors. Incident under investigation. Freddie Spencer and the panel of stewards began dissecting every frame of on-board footage and telemetry. The pressure from the Aprilia camp was immense. They demanded strict action for what they termed irresponsible braking. On the other side, Yamaha's defense argued it was a pure racing incident triggered by aerodynamic turbulence. However, the data told a different story. Telemetry confirmed that Toprak entered the corner at a significantly higher speed than on previous laps, indicating an element of forced desperation. The stewards' room became a battlefield of technical arguments. The debate centered on whether Toprak should have anticipated that the M1 wouldn't hold the line. Outside, journalists gathered like vultures waiting for the verdict that would define Toprak Sunday. The tension was palpable as everyone had an opinion on the aggressive WorldSBK-style Toprak brought to the grid. Some saw it as a breath of fresh air, others saw it as a threat to rider safety. After nearly an hour of exhausting review, the hammer finally fell. The decision was not only a blow to his race time but a slap to his professional ego. The verdict was transmitted electronically to the team, and in an instant, any hope of a top result at Jerez vanished into the dry Andalusian wind. This cold decision carried a chain reaction that would transform the entire weekend narrative into a desperate struggle for survival. Cliffhanger. The verdict was a penalty that would force Toprak to walk the path every rider on the grid fears the most. The news spread like wildfire through the Jerez paddock. Toprak Razgatlioglu was officially handed a long lap penalty for Sunday's main race, a sentence that turned his slim chances into a near-impossible mission. For a rider already starting from 19th, a long lap penalty is essentially a death sentence for any hope of points. The extra lane on the outside of a Jerez corner typically costs 3 to 4 seconds, but in the hyper-competitive MotoGP class of 2026, 4 seconds is an eternity that can drop a rider 10 places in an eye blink. This announcement triggered a wave of reaction on social media and among his loyal Turkish fanbase. Some felt the punishment was too severe, while others argued a precedent had to be set for safety. Inside the garage, the strategy books were thrown into the bin. Yamaha's mathematicians now had to recalculate tire wear and fuel consumption, as Toprak would have to perform an extra sprint through a penalty lane that is notoriously dirty and lacks grip. This was a massive psychological burden. Imagining the effort of overtaking multiple riders, only to lose those positions instantly while serving the penalty, is a mental test that could break anyone's focus. Paddock whispers shifted to how Toprak would react. Would he ride with blind fury and take even greater risks, or would he play it safe and accept a dismal result? Pressure from Yamaha management began to mount as well. They needed points, not just camera time for crashes. Late into the Jerez night, the lights in the Pramac garage remained on as Toprak and his crew searched for a way to mitigate the damage. They knew Sunday would be a long, grueling day of atonement. The atmosphere around Toprak changed from that of a challenger to that of an accused man who had to prove his worth all over again. This penalty wasn't just about time on the clock. It was about how he would be viewed by his peers for the rest of the season. The big question was no longer if he could win, but if he could finish the race without making another fatal mistake. As the Sunday sun climbed over the Jerez circuit, Toprak Razgatlioglu stood on the grid with a weight far heavier than his leathers, realizing he wasn't just racing his rivals, but his own penalty. Race day arrived with blistering heat, raising track temperatures to a point where tire management became critical. Toprak sat on his bike, surrounded by mechanics offering final words of encouragement, but behind his visor was a mask of deep concentration. This race was no longer about a podium, it was about redemption. As the lights went out, he had to be aggressive enough to gain positions before the long lap window opened, yet clean enough to avoid further scrutiny. The technical challenge was immense. Serving a long lap means the tires cool down slightly as they pass over unused asphalt, which can cause an immediate crash when merging back onto the racing line. Furthermore, he had to ensure he didn't touch the white lines, as doing so would trigger a second, even harsher penalty. All eyes were on the timing monitors. The narrative had shifted to the mental resilience of a champion. Observers noted that this was a crossroads in Toprak's MotoGP career. If he could navigate this with composure and bring home points, he would prove he possessed the maturity of a legend. If he failed, the label of a wild rider would stick to him forever. Every lap was a battle against frustration. In every corner, he had to suppress his instinct for extreme braking to ensure he didn't endanger anyone else. This was a forced transformation. In the stands, thousands held their breath every time he approached the penalty zone. Jerez that day wasn't just a racetrack. It was a courtroom where every move Toprak made was judged under a microscope. The outcome of this race would dictate his trajectory for 2026. Would this penalty break his spirit, or would it serve as the catalyst for a smarter, more dangerous version of Toprak? The Jerez asphalt had given its verdict, and now only time would tell how history would record this dramatic weekend. But as he exited the long lap lane, a sudden twist on the track forced Toprak into an instant